I'm Sarah, and for 5 years I handed my mother $800 every month while my twin sister Emma lived in the same house completely rent-free. But that financial inequality was just the surface of a family dynamic so twisted that it took a devastating family crisis to expose the truth about how expendable I really was to the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. The rent arrangement started when Emma and I were both 22, fresh out of college and moving back home to save money. We'd always been different. I was the organized one who worked through high school and college, while Emma was the creative free spirit who somehow always landed on her feet without much effort. When we both needed to come home temporarily, Mom sat us down for what I thought would be a fair discussion about household contributions. I remember that conversation so clearly because it was the first time I realized how differently my mother saw her two daughters. She explained that I would pay $800 monthly for rent and utilities since I had a full-time marketing job at a local firm. Emma, who was pursuing her art and working part-time at a coffee shop, would contribute by helping with household tasks and keeping Mom company. Even then, something felt wrong about the arrangement, but I told myself it was temporary and that fair didn't always mean equal. What I didn't understand was that this wasn't about financial necessity or fairness. It was about value systems that had been in place our entire lives. I was the reliable daughter, the one who could be counted on to handle responsibilities without complaint. Emma was the delicate one who needed protection and support to flourish. These roles had been assigned to us so early that neither of us questioned them, and I had learned to find pride in being the dependable one. The $800 represented more than just my contribution to household expenses. On my salary of $42,000, that payment consumed nearly a quarter of my take-home income. After taxes, health insurance, and retirement contributions, I was left with about $2,800 monthly. Paying $800 for rent meant I had just $2,000 for everything else: car payment, insurance, student loans, food, clothing, and any attempt at saving for my own future. Meanwhile, Emma's artistic pursuits were flourishing in ways that seemed magical. She had a dedicated studio space in what used to be our childhood playroom, complete with natural lighting and storage for her canvases and supplies. Mom had helped her apply for grants and artist residencies, drove her to gallery openings, and proudly displayed Emma's paintings throughout the house. When I came home from 10-hour days at work, I'd find them together in the kitchen, discussing Emma's latest creative breakthrough over elaborate dinners that I was usually too tired to fully appreciate. The resentment started as a small, guilty feeling that I tried to suppress. I loved my sister and wanted her to succeed, but I couldn't ignore how different our experiences were. While I worked overtime to afford basic necessities and still contribute $800 monthly to the household, Emma's days seemed filled with creativity, leisure, and constant maternal support. When I tried to express concerns about the financial arrangement, Mom would remind me that Emma was contributing in other ways, and that my success at work proved I didn't need the same level of support. This pattern continued for months, then years. I watched Emma's confidence and artistic abilities grow while I felt increasingly invisible in my own family home. The clearest example came during our 24th birthday celebration. Mom had planned an elaborate party highlighting Emma's recent gallery showing, complete with reproductions of her paintings as decorations and a speech about her artistic journey. When it came time to acknowledge my recent promotion to senior marketing coordinator, Mom offered a brief congratulations before redirecting attention back to Emma's artistic accomplishments. The financial inequality extended beyond just the rent arrangement. When Emma needed supplies for a major commission, Mom covered the $300 expense without hesitation. When my car needed emergency brake repairs costing $400, I was expected to handle it myself since I had a stable job. These seemingly small differences accumulated into a clear message about whose needs mattered and whose success was worthy of family investment. By our 25th birthday, the $800 monthly payments had totaled $48,000 over 5 years. That money could have been a down payment on my own home or substantial savings for my future, but instead it had subsidized a living arrangement that primarily benefited everyone except me. Emma had been able to save virtually her entire coffee shop income while building her artistic career with zero housing costs, while I struggled to accumulate any meaningful savings despite working full-time. The breaking point came when our grandmother passed away unexpectedly, leaving behind a modest but significant inheritance that would change everything I thought I knew about my family's values and priorities. Grandma Rose had been the one family member who seemed to see Emma and me as equally valuable. She attended my work presentations with the same enthusiasm she brought to Emma's art shows, and she frequently told us both how proud she was of our different but equally important paths. When the family gathered for the reading of Grandma Rose's will, I expected the inheritance to be divided equally among her children and grandchildren, as she had always emphasized fairness and equal treatment. The total estate was valued at approximately $120,000, with provisions for specific gifts and bequests. What I discovered was that Grandma Rose had left me $15,000 and Emma $5,000, with a note explaining that she wanted to help me achieve my goal of homeownership since she knew I had been sacrificing so much to support the family. Mom's reaction to this disparity was immediate and revealing. Rather than respecting our grandmother's wishes or acknowledging that perhaps Grandma Rose had observed the financial inequality I'd been living with, Mom announced that the inheritance should be redistributed equally between Emma and me. She argued that Grandma Rose hadn't understood our current living situation and that it wouldn't be fair for me to receive $10,000 more than my sister. The manipulation tactics that followed were so sophisticated that I almost convinced myself Mom was right. She explained that Grandma Rose had been influenced by outdated ideas about financial success, and that true family love meant ensuring equal outcomes regardless of individual circumstances. She reminded me that Emma's artistic contributions to the family were just as valuable as my financial ones, and that keeping the inheritance as Grandma Rose intended would create harmful resentment between sisters. For weeks, I wrestled with guilt and confusion about the inheritance situation. Part of me wanted to just give Emma half of my bequest to maintain family harmony, but something deeper was telling me that this pattern of sacrificing my financial security for others' comfort needed to stop. I decided to seek counsel from the estate attorney who had handled Grandma Rose's will, hoping for clarity about the legal and ethical implications of the situation. The attorney, Mrs. Henderson, reviewed the will carefully and confirmed that Grandma Rose had been very specific about her intentions. She had actually discussed the different bequest amounts during the will preparation, explaining that she wanted to help me overcome what she saw as an unfair financial burden I'd been carrying within the family. Mrs. Henderson also revealed that Grandma Rose had expressed concerns about favoritism patterns she'd observed, and that the inheritance distribution was her way of providing some balance. Armed with this information and a growing awareness of how my family's manipulation had affected my perception of fairness, I made the decision that would change everything. I told Mom and Emma that I would be keeping my inheritance as Grandma Rose intended, and that I would also be moving out of the family home within 60 days. The $15,000 would serve as a down payment for my own place, and the $800 I'd been paying monthly would finally go toward building my own future. The explosion that followed this announcement revealed depths of family dysfunction I hadn't fully recognized. Mom accused me of being selfish and ungrateful, claiming that I was abandoning the family when they needed me most. She argued that my stable job meant I didn't need the extra inheritance money as much as Emma, who was still building her artistic career. The emotional manipulation was relentless. I was destroying family unity, being materialistic, and failing to understand the value of Emma's contributions to our household. Emma's response was equally devastating, but in a different way. Rather than expressing any understanding of my financial sacrifices over the past 5 years, she seemed genuinely shocked that I would consider keeping money that could benefit her artistic pursuits. She had become so accustomed to my financial contributions being invisible that she couldn't comprehend why I might want to prioritize my own financial security for once. The most painful moment came when Mom suggested that perhaps I had never really understood what family meant, and that my focus on money proved I lacked the generous spirit that made Emma such a wonderful daughter. This attack on my character, combined with the complete dismissal of 5 years of financial sacrifice, finally clarified how thoroughly I had been devalued within my own family system. I spent that night calculating exactly what my financial contributions had meant over the past 5 years. The $48,000 in rent payments, plus the countless times I'd covered family dinners, emergency expenses, and household items, totaled well over $50,000. Meanwhile, Emma had been able to save money, build her artistic career, and receive constant emotional and practical support, all while contributing minimally to household expenses. The clarity was devastating but also liberating. I realized that my role in the family had been that of a financial and emotional support system rather than a valued family member. My contributions were expected and invisible, while Emma's much smaller contributions were celebrated and appreciated. The inheritance disparity had simply exposed a pattern that had been in place for years. I was valued for what I could provide, not for who I was. Moving forward with my plan required a level of emotional strength I didn't know I possessed. I found a small apartment across town and began the process of establishing my own independent living situation. The relief of knowing that my $800 would go toward my own rent instead of subsidizing others' comfort was profound, but the emotional cost of family rejection was significant. Mom's attempts to guilt me into changing my mind intensified as my move-out date approached. She oscillated between anger and martyrdom, sometimes accusing me of financial selfishness, and other times lamenting how my departure would affect Emma's artistic development and her own sense of family completion. The emotional manipulation was exhausting, but it also confirmed that my decision was necessary for my own well-being. The day I moved out was both heartbreaking and empowering. As I packed my belongings, I reflected on how much of my adult life had been shaped by the need to maintain family harmony at the expense of my own financial and emotional health. The apartment I was moving to was smaller and less luxurious than my childhood bedroom, but it represented something I'd never had before: a living situation where my contributions would benefit my own future. Emma's reaction to my departure was perhaps the most revealing aspect of the entire situation. Rather than expressing gratitude for the 5 years of financial support I'd provided or understanding about my need for independence, she seemed primarily concerned about how my absence would affect her own living situation. The possibility that she might need to contribute more to household expenses or take on additional responsibilities hadn't occurred to her, which demonstrated how completely she'd taken my contributions for granted. The first month in my own apartment was an adjustment period filled with both freedom and loneliness. For the first time in my adult life, my entire paycheck belonged to me. The $800 that had gone to Mom's household could now be divided between my own rent, savings, and personal goals. I was able to buy groceries I actually wanted to eat, invest in professional development courses, and begin building an emergency fund. But the emotional isolation was difficult. Family gatherings continued without me, and I learned about them through social media posts that showed Mom and Emma maintaining their close relationship while my absence went largely unacknowledged. The message was clear: the family unit could function perfectly well without me, which confirmed that my primary value had been financial rather than emotional. 6 months after moving out, I received news that would test every boundary I'd established and reveal whether my family was capable of genuine change. Emma had been offered a significant gallery representation opportunity that required her to relocate to a larger city and invest in a professional studio space. The opportunity was legitimate and exciting, but it would require financial resources that neither she nor Mom possessed. The phone call from Mom was predictable in its manipulation, but stunning in its transparency. She explained that Emma's artistic career was at a crucial juncture and that family support during this pivotal moment would make the difference between success and missed opportunity. The subtext was clear: they needed me to provide financial assistance for Emma's career advancement, despite having rejected my need for financial fairness just months earlier. What made the request particularly galling was the complete absence of any acknowledgement about the 5 years of support I'd already provided, or any apology for the treatment I'd received when asserting my own financial needs. They approached me exactly as they always had, as a resource to be utilized when needed, rather than as a family member whose own financial goals and boundaries deserved respect. My response marked a turning point in my relationship with my family and my understanding of my own worth. I explained that I was happy for Emma's opportunity, but that I wouldn't be providing financial assistance. I had my own financial goals, including homeownership and retirement planning, that required my full attention and resources. Most importantly, I had learned that my financial contributions were taken for granted rather than appreciated, and I was no longer willing to participate in that dynamic. The aftermath of my refusal was swift and revealing. Mom accused me of jealousy and pettiness, suggesting that I was sabotaging Emma's career out of resentment about our different life paths. Emma expressed bewilderment about why I wouldn't want to help family during important moments, demonstrating that she still viewed my financial support as an entitlement rather than a choice. The most illuminating aspect of their reaction was the complete absence of any attempt to understand my perspective or acknowledge the validity of my boundaries. There was no recognition that I had already provided substantial support over many years, no gratitude for past contributions, and no respect for my current financial priorities. Their focus remained entirely on what I could provide for them, rather than what our relationship could offer mutual support and respect. This experience clarified that the family dynamic I'd grown up with was fundamentally extractive rather than supportive. My role had been to provide financial and emotional resources while receiving minimal consideration for my own needs and goals. The inheritance dispute and Emma's career opportunity had simply exposed a pattern that had been in place throughout my adult life. I made the decision to establish firm boundaries that prioritized my own well-being while remaining open to genuine relationship repair if my family demonstrated the capacity for change. This meant no longer providing financial assistance that wasn't reciprocal, no longer accepting guilt trips about family loyalty when my boundaries were respected, and no longer prioritizing family harmony over my own emotional and financial health. The year that followed was transformative in ways I hadn't anticipated. Without the financial drain of subsidizing others and the emotional stress of managing family manipulation, I was able to focus entirely on my own goals and development. I completed a professional certification program that led to a promotion and salary increase, built a substantial emergency fund, and began seriously planning for homeownership. More importantly, I began developing friendships and professional relationships based on mutual respect and reciprocity, rather than one-sided support dynamics. I discovered that healthy relationships involved both people contributing and benefiting, rather than one person constantly giving while others took. This contrast highlighted how abnormal my family relationships had become, and how much personal growth had been stunted by those dynamics. The most unexpected development came when I realized that my professional success and personal stability had attracted the attention of colleagues and friends who valued my reliability and competence. A mentor at work encouraged me to apply for a management position that would involve relocating to a larger city and significantly increasing my salary. The opportunity represented everything I'd been working toward: professional advancement, financial security, and the chance to build a life based on my own choices rather than family obligations. When I shared news of the potential job opportunity with my family, their reaction was predictably self-centered. Rather than expressing pride or excitement about my professional advancement, Mom immediately focused on how my relocation would affect family gatherings and Emma's access to my support. Emma seemed genuinely surprised that I would consider moving away, as if my physical presence and availability for assistance were permanent entitlements rather than choices I made. Their response confirmed that my family still viewed me primarily as a resource for their own needs, rather than as an individual with her own goals and aspirations. The idea that I might prioritize my career advancement over their convenience hadn't occurred to them, which demonstrated how little they understood about my actual priorities and values. I accepted the position and began planning my relocation with a sense of excitement and freedom I hadn't experienced since college. The salary increase would allow me to accelerate my savings goals and begin building the kind of financial security I'd always dreamed of. More importantly, the physical distance would create natural boundaries that would prevent my family from assuming automatic access to my time and resources. The moving process was emotionally complex, but ultimately liberating. As I packed my belongings and prepared to leave the city where I'd spent my entire life, I reflected on how much personal growth had occurred since the inheritance dispute first forced me to examine my family relationships. I had learned to value my own financial security, establish healthy boundaries, and prioritize relationships based on mutual respect rather than obligation. My new position exceeded every expectation I'd had about professional fulfillment and financial security. The salary increase allowed me to save aggressively for homeownership while also investing in retirement planning and personal development. For the first time in my adult life, I had true financial freedom, the ability to make choices based on my own preferences rather than external obligations or manipulation. The physical distance from my family created space for perspective and healing that wouldn't have been possible while remaining geographically close. I was able to process the years of financial manipulation and emotional invalidation without constant pressure to maintain family harmony. This distance also allowed me to evaluate my family relationships objectively, rather than through the lens of guilt and obligation that had shaped my responses for so many years. 18 months after accepting the new position, I had saved enough for a down payment on a condominium in my new city. The day I closed on my first home was profoundly emotional. It represented the financial goal I'd been working toward since college, delayed by years of family financial contributions, but finally achieved through focused determination and healthy boundaries. The irony wasn't lost on me that the $15,000 inheritance from Grandma Rose, which my family had wanted me to share with Emma, had indeed served as the foundation for homeownership exactly as my grandmother had intended. Her insight about the financial inequality I'd been experiencing proved more accurate than anyone in my family had been willing to acknowledge. When I shared news of my home purchase with my family, their reactions revealed that little had changed in their fundamental approach to our relationships. Mom's first response focused on how my home ownership would affect my ability to provide financial assistance for future family needs. Emma seemed primarily interested in whether I had enough space for family visits, rather than expressing genuine pride in my achievement. Their inability to simply celebrate my success without immediately considering how it might benefit them confirmed that the patterns I'd recognized years earlier remained unchanged. My family still viewed my accomplishments primarily through the lens of what they could access or extract, rather than recognizing them as personal achievements worthy of support and celebration. This realization was both disappointing and liberating. I had hoped that my professional success and clear boundary setting might encourage my family to develop more reciprocal relationship patterns, but their fundamental approach to relationships appeared fixed. Rather than learning to value me as an individual, they continued to assess my worth based on my potential contributions to their own goals and comfort. The most significant development came when I learned through a mutual family friend that Emma's gallery representation hadn't materialized as expected, and she was struggling financially without the support system she'd taken for granted. Mom had apparently been covering more of Emma's expenses since my departure, which had created financial strain that affected both of them. My initial reaction was a complex mixture of concern and vindication. I felt genuinely sorry that Emma was experiencing financial difficulties, but I also felt validated that my contributions had been more significant than my family had acknowledged. The financial strain they were experiencing in my absence proved that my $800 monthly payments and other support had been substantial and necessary. When Mom called to update me about Emma's situation, the conversation followed a predictable pattern. She framed Emma's difficulties as temporary setbacks that family support could help overcome, and she hinted that my financial stability positioned me to provide assistance during this challenging period. The manipulation tactics were familiar, but less effective now that I had distance and perspective. I listened with empathy but maintained my boundaries firmly. I expressed genuine concern for Emma's well-being while making it clear that I wouldn't be providing financial assistance. I had my own financial goals and obligations, and I had learned that my family took my contributions for granted rather than appreciating them as generous choices. The conversation that followed was illuminating because it revealed how little my family understood about healthy relationship dynamics or mutual support. Mom seemed genuinely confused about why I wouldn't want to help family members in need, as if my previous years of financial support meant I was permanently obligated to continue providing assistance regardless of my own needs or their treatment of me. When I attempted to explain that healthy support involves reciprocity and appreciation rather than one-sided extraction, Mom dismissed my concerns as selfishness and materialism. She argued that family love meant giving without keeping score, which completely ignored the reality that I had been giving for years while receiving little acknowledgement or consideration in return. This conversation clarified that my family had no understanding of or interest in developing more balanced relationship dynamics. They viewed my boundary setting as temporary rebellion rather than permanent changes based on self-respect and healthy relationship principles. Their expectation that I would eventually return to my previous role as financial supporter demonstrated how deeply entrenched their perception of my value remained. I realized that meaningful relationship repair would require my family to acknowledge the one-sided nature of our previous dynamics and demonstrate genuine commitment to more reciprocal interactions. Without that foundation, any continued contact would simply perpetuate the patterns that had been so damaging to my financial and emotional well-being. The decision to maintain firm boundaries while remaining open to genuine change required constant vigilance and self-advocacy. Family gatherings became optional rather than obligatory, and I learned to evaluate each interaction based on whether it contributed positively to my life rather than simply maintaining family harmony. Over time, I developed relationships with colleagues and friends who valued my contributions while also offering their own support and consideration. These healthy relationships provided a stark contrast to my family dynamics and reinforced the validity of my boundary-setting decisions. I learned that mutual respect and reciprocity were not unreasonable expectations, but rather the foundation of all healthy relationships. 2 years after establishing my independence, I had achieved levels of financial security and personal fulfillment that would have been impossible while maintaining my previous family dynamics. I owned my own home, had substantial savings, and was advancing steadily in my career. More importantly, I had developed a strong sense of self-worth that wasn't dependent on others' approval or appreciation. The most profound realization was that my worth had never been dependent on my family's recognition or treatment. I had spent years trying to earn love and respect through financial contributions and emotional support, but I learned that self-worth comes from internal recognition of one's own value, rather than external validation. This understanding transformed how I approached all relationships, not just family dynamics. I learned to recognize manipulation tactics early, establish boundaries proactively rather than reactively, and prioritize relationships that offered mutual benefit and respect. These skills served me well in professional settings and personal relationships, creating a foundation for continued growth and success. If you found yourself in similar situations where family members take your contributions for granted while expecting continued support regardless of how they treat you, please know that you're not alone and that change is possible. Your financial security and emotional well-being matter just as much as anyone else's, and healthy relationships require mutual respect rather than one-sided sacrifice. Setting boundaries with family can be incredibly difficult, especially when you've been conditioned to prioritize others' needs over your own. But I've learned that true family love involves supporting each other's growth and independence, rather than creating dependencies that serve some members at others' expense. The process of establishing independence and healthy boundaries is challenging but ultimately liberating. It requires courage to disappoint others in service of your own well-being, but it also creates space for authentic relationships based on mutual respect and genuine care. I want to encourage anyone dealing with similar family dynamics to trust their instincts about fairness and reciprocity. If you feel like you're giving more than you're receiving, or if your contributions are taken for granted while others' smaller contributions are celebrated, those feelings are valid and deserve attention. Financial manipulation is particularly insidious because it often masquerades as family responsibility or love. But healthy family relationships involve fair distribution of responsibilities and appreciation for everyone's contributions. If you're constantly expected to provide financial support while others' needs are prioritized over yours, that's not family love, it's exploitation. My experience taught me that some relationships can't be repaired unless all parties are committed to change, and that's okay. Your responsibility is to protect your own well-being and create space for relationships that honor your worth. You can't force others to value you appropriately, but you can insist on being treated with respect and reciprocity. The inheritance situation that started this journey taught me that sometimes external validation, like my grandmother's recognition of the inequality I'd been experiencing, provides clarity that internal doubt prevents us from seeing. Trust those moments when others affirm what you've been feeling. They often see the situation more clearly than you can from inside it. Building financial independence while maintaining family relationships requires careful balance, but it's absolutely possible. Your money belongs to you, and you have the right to use it in ways that serve your own goals and values. Family members who truly care about your well-being will support your financial independence rather than undermining it. For those currently supporting family members financially, I encourage you to evaluate whether that support is appreciated and reciprocated or simply expected and taken for granted. Healthy support involves gratitude, respect, and eventual independence rather than ongoing dependency that serves others at your expense. Remember that you can love your family while refusing to enable dysfunctional patterns that harm your own well-being. Setting boundaries isn't about punishment or revenge. It's about creating space for healthier interactions and protecting yourself from relationships that drain your resources without offering mutual benefit. If you've experienced similar family favoritism, financial manipulation, or one-sided relationship dynamics, I'd love to hear your story in the comments. Sharing our experiences helps others recognize that they're not alone and that change is possible. Please consider subscribing if this story resonated with you. Knowing that others have overcome similar challenges can provide hope and validation during difficult times. Your worth isn't determined by how much you can provide for others or how well you can absorb mistreatment while maintaining family harmony. You deserve relationships that celebrate your achievements, respect your boundaries, and contribute positively to your life. Don't settle for less than that, even from family members who should know better.